فایننس چین الان کلی قرار فایننس بکنه خب نمیاد.
So let's talk about China, because something we predicted just a few days ago was exactly this, that the current new Iranian attempt to reclose the Strait of Hormuz and their desperate strategy to start targeting oil tankers in the Persian Gulf was actually going to backfire on them diplomatically. And why did we say that? Because, folks, what they're currently doing is about a lot more than just trying to antagonize or remain defiant against the United States. Who are they really fundamentally messing with here? Well, let's first start off by talking about the Gulf states. These are the very Muslim countries that we have long tried to argue it was a strategic mistake for Iran to bring nations like Saudi Arabia into this war. After all, those are the very countries that were spending a lot of time trying to mediate the peace talks between America and Iran, and then Iran responds by, of course, bombing potentially their only advocates in the region. Well, now it is the case, folks, that you're not just sending random missiles at Dubai, you are actively messing with the economy and the oil money of these Arab sheiks. And if we know anything about Arab sheiks, that's not exactly something that is going to make them all that happy. You think Saudi Arabia is happy about this? You think Qatar is satisfied to see Iran just completely harassing all of their shipping and all the money they're making through the Persian Gulf? Absolutely not. Iran is burning those very nations once again. But of course, that's not even the biggest story here. I predicted a few days ago that Iran's harassment of the Strait of Hormuz would actually not be tolerated by China. Why? Because while it is the case that Iran can try to let the Chinese oil tankers out and just assume that there will be no retaliation, what they're inviting by harassing the shipping of the Strait of Hormuz is ultimately what? Mutually assured destruction, which means that if Iran starts trying to mess with the West by blowing up their oil tankers, then guess exactly what the United States and even Gulf allies can do as it pertains to Iranian oil tankers headed out to China through the very same Persian Gulf. This is not to mention, too, by the way, that China also marginally does buy some other oil from other Gulf states. And so, actually, what is really at the moment in Beijing's best interest is to get Iran to stop with this, because they're actually in the process really threatening Beijing's ultimate oil supply. And as I predicted, it would not go over well diplomatically. Well, we have just got these signs here in the past 24 hours that is exactly the response of Beijing. Their government has now come out in official statements actually condemning the Iranian strikes on the Gulf states, and this timing is allegedly coincidental given the fact that they're now actually trying to potentially screw over, intentionally or not, right, the Chinese ability to ship oil through the Persian Gulf. Yeah, folks, I don't think any of this is exactly an accident. And as I stated, yet another strategic blunder by Iran. You know, a lot of people like to paint these Iranians as truly rational actors who are just acting in their self-interest and they want diplomacy, but, you know, they're going to keep on fighting and they're being really smart about this. No, folks, they've not been smart about this war, okay? Attacking Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE was not smart in this war. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz or attempting to do so when they obviously know what's going to happen, right? We actually have brand new news today as to what Trump is doing potentially to their own oil infrastructure. As I said, Iran is simply inviting mutually assured destruction here. Now that consequence likewise is coming back to bite them. And then, of course, we got to talk about Beijing, who right now is not just appearing to somewhat almost flip sides or at least sue for peace, but you have to imagine in the greater context of Operation Epic Fury is likewise watching as one of their top potential future military allies is going down. Meanwhile, Beijing is effectively abandoning them. But what, of course, does it also mean for the greater context of a future World War III style scenario in Taiwan? We'll talk about all of that here today, guys. But again, really interesting developments here coming out of a new shifted Chinese response towards the Iran situation. Let's get into it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, for all of the reasons I sort of broke down in the beginning, again, why it's actually a mistake for Iran, in the eyes of China, to start harassing the Strait of Hormuz, take a listen to what Beijing officials are now saying, actually condemning Iran for striking the Gulf states. In other words, they're not very happy about this because what? Iran, while maybe being a marginal ally of China, is right now hurting China's ability to do business. And if they were hoping potentially that Beijing would be their advocate in this scenario, it's not something that's really helping the allegedly new Iranian government. Take a listen for yourself.
China does not agree with the attacks on Gulf states and condemns all indiscriminate attacks on civilians and non-military targets. The urgent task is to immediately cease military operations and prevent further expansion of the conflict. The solution lies in returning to dialogue and negotiation as soon as possible and striving to restore peace. The fundamental solution is to jointly return to the right track of abiding by international law and the basic norms of international relations.
Now, on the surface, that response might seem a little bit surprising. After all, aren't China and Iran supposed to be close friends? But when you delve deeper into their relationship, I think you find that, no, this is not all that unexpected for a number of reasons. First and foremost is the fact that when you look at the Eastern Axis, the BRICS alliance, whatever you want to call it, but yes, this group of nations that many think would potentially be the coalition against the West in World War III, that includes actors like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, formerly Venezuela, that despite any public image of unity, it's really the case behind the scenes that these countries are not all that close to each other. You're dealing with a bunch of ruthlessly pragmatic autocrats that ultimately are in it for themselves. And so while, yes, they might have some shared interest in opposing the West, that's really all there is to it. And so in reality, what happens is that when Beijing looks at Iran and says, hey, you're no longer really being all that useful to us, they will immediately leave you out to dry, which is, of course, exactly what happened to them, exactly what happened to Venezuela, too, by the way. You wonder why China didn't really do much, didn't come to their aid, just issued these vague statements of condemnation or diplomacy or something. Yeah, that is, of course, the reason why, because China is ultimately acting in their own self-interest. And, you know, they're maybe willing to sort of try to buy these alliances, but if they come apart because America gets involved at the end of the day, I think you're watching China saying, well, you know, then we're going to do something else, but we're not really going to get involved in this fight. So, you know, should have considered that before you started doing business with them, I suppose, talking there to a country like Iran. But that, of course, brings me to my second point, which is that, yes, what Iran is doing right now with the Persian Gulf, as I stated in the beginning, is actually undermining the interest of China because they're likewise threatening the oil and economy of China, not only by potentially putting their own oil shipping at risk because, again, that mutually assured destruction scenario, but secondly, you wonder why China specifically tries to offer words of help for the Gulf states is because those countries also sell oil to China. And China, obviously, looking forward to the 21st century, obviously needs a lot of energy for their economy, but secondly, would need massive oil reserves to perpetuate a potential invasion of Taiwan, which we'll talk about here in a second, if Iran is acting in ways that are actually kind of suicidal to those interests. Where do you think Beijing's going to flip here? Well, let's talk about that, because tonight, President Trump has announced retaliation for recent Iranian attempts and attacks across the Strait of Hormuz, announcing today that the U.S. military had totally obliterated every military target on Kharg Island, sparing the oil infrastructure, at least for now. But this is a significant development given that the island handles 90% of Iranian crude oil exports. So essentially, what was the warning shot sent by the U.S. military today? If you're going to mess with oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, we can do the same. We can completely cut off your access to China, which makes you 80% of your oil exports and ultimately your money there. We can screw with you too. Again, Iran, this is dumb what you're doing. You're inviting mutually assured destruction that you cannot survive. And yes, you have to imagine this is not something that Beijing likes to see, which is partially probably why they're also secretly trying to tell Iran right now, we think you should pursue diplomacy because this ultimately is a suicidal move. And again, Trump, they're basically willing to say, you want to play that game? Two can play it. So here's what he stated, quote, "Moments ago at my direction, the United States Central Command executed one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Kharg Island. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reasons of decency, I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island," which is, of course, very important. You know, you hear a lot of talk from the Pentagon and Trump himself that, hey, we still have aces up our sleeves. We still have things we can target even beyond Iran's military. We haven't done so yet. If you thought maybe that sounded like bluffing, Clearly, you can see that it is not, right? We held this off the table. Why? Because, well, let's see if the Iranian government wants to talk. By the way, as it pertains to Beijing, where are they going to fall here diplomatically? Let's maybe not immediately go and target their oil lifeline here. But if push comes to shove, and Iran wants to keep doing this, right? They want to keep messing with global oil supply in the Strait of Hormuz, and all of their oil sits on Kharg Island for transport. 80% of it is going to China, potentially cutting off China's access point there. Then keep in mind, Iran, again, what are you inviting here? Mutually assured destruction. We can absolutely do that. So he further goes on here to state, however, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. During my first term and currently, I rebuilt our military into the most lethal, powerful, and effective force by far anywhere in the world. Iran has no ability to defend anything that we want to attack, and I think that part is clear. As it pertains at least to control of airspace, it is essentially uncontested over there right now. Iran has no ability, yes, so there is nothing they can do about it. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, nor will it have the ability to threaten the United States of America, the Middle East, or for that matter, the world. Iran's military and all others involved with this terrorist regime would be wise to lay down their arms and save what's left of their country, which isn't much. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And again, what has the Chinese response to this been? By and large, silence from a military perspective. Let's not forget the signs of China maybe being a little bit squeamish towards backing Iran started not just recently, but from day one of Operation Epic Fury. Not very trustworthy allies, I guess, from both perspectives there.
Well, many people are asking why China hasn't come to the aid of its close ally, Iran. We've just arrived at the Foreign Minister's annual press conference, along with hundreds of other journalists who are queuing up. There's a great deal of interest in what Wang Yi has to say. He's already condemned the war. He's called it a violation of international law. But we are expecting it to be one of the top issues that he will discuss. We are now inside the media centre waiting for the press conference to start. But what we can tell you is that while China has one of the largest militaries in the world, it doesn't have the ability to project power 3,500 miles away in the Middle East. Only the US does. It's also not China's style to get involved militarily in its allies' fights. It prefers to condemn America's actions from the sidelines. We saw that when the US captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro back in January. China's leadership is far more pragmatic. Well, the press conference with Wang Yi has just wrapped, and he was actually quite measured on the issue of Iran. He said that this is a war that should not have happened, it benefits no one, and that military operations should cease immediately. It's not surprising considering that President Trump is coming here in 3 weeks' time, and both sides need a win. The US economy needs a shot in the arm, and President Trump needs to take home deals to shore up his support in the midterms. But without doubt, China is closely watching the war in Iran and America's use of firepower.
And guys, as we've watched everything that's taken place over the past couple of months, whether that's in Iran or Venezuela, I want you to keep the date of March 31st in mind, because that is the day when the Trump-Xi summit was previously planned to take place in Beijing. This is going to be a huge meeting, obviously, between America and China. There are key issues to discuss like trade and overall geopolitical relations between the two powers. But now what's changing? Trump is coming to that meeting with huge leverage on the negotiating table, considering that Iran and Venezuela are now basically off of the chessboard for China. And I would argue everything we're doing right now, although it may have some downside effects and there's certain things that people get squeamish about, totally understand that. I think long-term is essentially preventing a future Taiwan crisis and World War III headed into the 21st century, and allow me to explain why, right? Why does the calculus, as compared to a couple of months ago, now suddenly change for Beijing, considering what's happening in Venezuela and what's happening in Iran? And by the way, why you're even seeing the signs of that from their public rhetoric. Maybe they're considering perhaps dropping this adversarial, we're going to beat America style viewpoint of the the 21st century and shifting more so towards okay, we'll cooperate with America. We're going to be an economic power, but not a military one. What's kind of different here? Well, here's how I think everything that's happening right now essentially changes the world. First and foremost, I think we've already made the point about oil. It goes without saying that China is going to need massive oil reserves to perpetuate an invasion of Taiwan. You got to get those ships across the strait somehow. And while it is true, don't get me wrong, that China can get their oil from other places, that of course includes the Gulf states, I've pointed out in the past that if Iran and Venezuela are knocked out, then essentially, besides Russia, the only place they can really get their oil from is through an American ally, which is to say what? Under severely bad diplomatic circumstances, because obviously if China invades Taiwan, I think you're going to see severe international sanctions levied against them, then that is not really a stable relationship, right? You know for a fact Iran and Venezuela, super anti-Western, super anti-America, they're going to give you the oil no matter what. That kind of calculus is not necessarily true of, say, a country like Saudi Arabia that, yeah, kind of has its hands in both camps, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think you would still argue right now as of 2026, America has slightly more leverage over the Gulf states than China, not something you can necessarily trust. So obviously that's big. If you cut off those oil pipelines basically to China, then can you invade Taiwan? Do you even have the resources? Is it a safe maneuver to make? You have to be asking serious questions about that. But of course, secondarily, I think, it's kind of ironic almost that you prevent wider war by starting what you could call smaller wars. But it's also the case, let's be real, that watching American military might right now not just decimate Venezuela, not just decimate Iran, but also likewise decimate large amounts of Chinese and Russian technology and potentially even intelligence. Also, if you're a Chinese military planner right now, certainly has to make you sort of reconsider whether we can really do this in Taiwan. And by the way, if you had the idea that maybe America would not come to Taiwan's rescue, watching how quote unquote maybe aggressive or bold right now America's being on the world stage certainly has to make you start to ask second questions about that. If you thought the 21st century might be a time of American retreat or decline, not really so much right now, right? That whole viewpoint has to change watching how America's been moving. You cannot deny that.
خیلی هست. بحث ایران هم یک سری متحدین داره مثل روسیه و چین. ما تو جنگ 12 روزه خب کمکی عملاً به ایران نکردن. اگر واقعا درگیر جنگ شیم میتونیم روی کمک اونا حساب کنیم یا کمکی کردن تا حالا کمک خواهند کرد یا نه؟
کمک به معنای این که تکنولوژی هایی که بازی جنگ رو عوض بکنه، به معنای سلاح های استراتژیکی که در رده سلاح استراتژیک قرار بگیره نخواهند کرد. ولی در یک رده پایین تر، مثلا تجهیزات اختلال جنگ الکترونیکی یا جنگار، فکر میکنم هم کردند هم خواهند کرد. یا در اختیار قرار دادن اطلاعات نظامی حساس.
Yeah, and how'd that work out for you? How did Chinese and Russian air defenses fare in Venezuela, for instance? How did Chinese and Russian drones fare in Iran? How much did the alleged reports that they are sharing sensitive military intelligence, including the locations of American troops and, movements and all of that, really make your war plan against America any more effective or all that useful? I mean, it's just been the simple reality here, not at all whatsoever. Now, of course, if you're the Chinese military right now, and you're currently making strategic plans for Taiwan, it's worth noting that Xi Jinping in the past has been pretty aggressive on this. A couple of years ago, he ordered the military to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. That is, of course, next year. Right now, watching what America's doing, and again, the proxy war aspect of this, how your military tech is basically faring against them, well, needless to say, by and large, what America's doing right now likely has to be a deterrent, even from a pure technological perspective. And by the way, I'd point out, I think you have seen the signs of that. Many noted throughout, especially the first week of this war, that Chinese military technology near the Taiwan Strait had went noticeably silent. For the first whole 7 days, they did not dispatch a single warplane near Taiwan for that entire week, which is highly irregular behavior. They're almost always doing military exercises there. What's that all about? Now, one could argue, oh, maybe that's a bad thing because maybe they're getting ready to do something real. But simultaneously, it could also be, well, maybe they're starting to think to themselves, hold on, are we sure we want to do this? Are we sure we want to go ahead And as I said, that is sort of the maybe ironic but very real way in which sometimes you have to actually flex your military force and use your military to prevent having to use your military, which is to say what? Smaller shows of force can actually be deterrents for much wider, larger events, and that, of course, includes the Taiwan crisis. And then lastly, of course, is the point of China losing their allies here. This is kind of a strike number 3 as to why China, from a military, not an economic perspective, but a military perspective, is heavily checkmated here, because not only are they losing Venezuela and Iran, which is not just about oil, I have long speculated that that also gives them the ability to open up new fronts of World War III. And what I mean by that is that if China does not believe that they could defeat America conventionally if they invade Taiwan, the other option is to kind of start a global conflict. Say, hey, Iran, move on the Middle East. Hey, Venezuela, move on Latin America, North Korea even potentially, move on South Korea. And then that sort of distracted element sort of gives you the ability to move in on Taiwan, because America and the West would be way too distracted on many fronts. Well, Venezuela is now off the table. Iran, though marginally claiming to be intact, we've sort of covered how we don't really think their government is all that stable. And certainly, given what they've just witnessed right now and the total destruction of their military capacity, likewise does seem to be off the table. By the way, we may even discuss this in a future video, but even relations between North Korea and China have actually soured as of late. China's sort of distancing themselves from them too. They're actually moving a lot closer to Russia, and it's this very awkward relationship. Will North Korea, will Kim Jong-un necessarily even take marching orders from China? I don't think that's a given, provided the way, of course, we've also seen China treats its so-called BRICS allies, which is to say what? These are totally transactional relationships. And, if you really need China's help, are they really going to come bail you out at the end of the day? I think we've seen that is not the case. And so what you are watching at the moment, I would argue, is the total disintegration of BRICS, of that Eastern axis, right? I mean, first of all, the two of the biggest power players in the so-called alliance are now gone, Venezuela and Iran. But likewise, I mean, you're watching these internal rifts, right? North Korea, China not getting along so much. Russia maybe seems like they want to be the more military leader, right? The more openly sort of antagonistic power against the West. But they can't really do all of that much if they don't have China's economic engine behind the helm. And then as it pertains to China's economy, well, as much as they may want to overtake America, have this moment where the 21st century belongs to them, it's also kind of complicated for Beijing because, you might want to move on Taiwan. Yeah, you're sort of more aligned with the Eastern Front, but then simultaneously, your economy is heavily reliant on what? Trade with the West. And so considering all of these, you put all these factors together, I would argue that the calculus right now for China to move on Taiwan really does not make a whole lot of sense. They've been militarily, geopolitically, and even economically from a natural resources perspective, basically here been checkmated. And what would my message about all of that be going into the Trump-Xi summit as it pertains to potential diplomacy with China? Well, I'd put it very simply this way, right? Here's what you're kind of watching right now if you're Beijing. And again, taking the viewpoint that these people are very ruthlessly pragmatic about their own self-interest, which I think Beijing genuinely is. I mean, they certainly don't care about anyone else, right? Is basically this. Look, China absolutely can be a very powerful country in the 21st century. They're already a powerful country. They're certainly an economic powerhouse. But when it comes to them maybe trying to overtake America for that top dog number 1 spot and trying to militarily challenge the West, America's basically sending the message right now, that's not going to happen, okay? So you can continue to do trade. You can do trade with us. You can get your oil from other places in the Middle East. But understand that when you do trade, when your economy functions, right, this whole idea of post-Liberation Day that you might be able to withdraw and create this new economic and new world order based around Beijing really is not happening right now. That's just not going to be possible, right? Like, China can be powerful, but really their best path forward right now is to remain that second place country from the United States and, continue to have an economic relationship with the world, get your oil, get your natural resources. But they're basically in a position right now where if they wanted to try to leapfrog us, if they wanted to try to confront us directly, they're too checkmated to really have any serious or meaningful way to do that, which I would further argue, right, changes the entire sort of viewpoint as to what China might be, going forward, right? Because if this whole anti-Western alliance they were trying to build ultimately got shattered, if, the military clearly not really where it needs to be to fight the West, then, maybe we see a world where the sort of more 2008 view of China, of them as a sort of trading partner, and yeah, we don't fully trust them, but also we're not about to fight World War III with them. Maybe that can be the case, which I would argue is a better thing for the world than directly us basically being in a new Cold War and fighting potentially a hot war against, over Taiwan, I should say there. So, that would be my message going in, basically telling China, look, from a military perspective, you need to stand down. We can do our own economic activities and have trade and all that, but just understand in the 21st century, this is not something that's going to happen. And why, by the way, I've argued, right, what Iran really has been about this entire time, and potentially even a part of Venezuela, is about, of course, this whole China issue. So we'll talk about this much more. I plan to actually speak further about the whole China thing because it's so important, especially as we get closer to the Trump-Xi summit. But I'll leave it there for now, guys. That said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.